Forgot to get wired up in advance. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Last week we talked from chapter 5 about the man who had his father's wife. He says that wasn't even named among the Gentiles. It's pretty embarrassing when the people of God live worse sometimes than people of the world. But he told them how they should deal with that, and that is deliver such a one to Satan when they're gathered together. They're not to eat with them or keep company with them. He goes on to say that we're to judge those that are within. Now this is interesting because our culture doesn't understand this. They'll say you should never judge anybody ever. Yet the Bible teaches us there are some times where we need to judge those within the church. We are among ourselves, but we leave the judgment of those outside the church to God. Now, having said that in verse 12 and 13 of chapter 5, now look at verse 1 of chapter 6. He says, "Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unjust and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints shall judge the world? And if the world shall be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments of things pertaining to this life, set them to judge, who are least esteemed in the church. I speak to your shame. Is it so that there's not a wise man among you? No, not one that shall be able to judge between his brethren. But brother goeth to law with brother, and that before the unbelievers. Now therefore there is utterly a fault among you, because you go to law one with another. Why do you not rather take wrong? Why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? Nay, you do wrong and defraud, and that your brethren." Obviously what's taking place here is they are taking their brethren to a secular court. He says this is a fault and it's a shame. And he begins in verse 1, says, "Dare any of you." That word dare is, some may say, how dare you? Suggests to me that the audacity, the boldness in a bad way, arrogant disregard for what is proper and what is right, what we should be, how we should treat one another. What a despicable disgrace if brethren can't sort problems out among themselves, that they have to go to people who don't really understand true justice. But we've got to have that dispute settled among ourselves. Isn't that a terrible thing? When who should know the concept of justice better than the people of God? Who should understand what is right and what is wrong better than the people who've been given the Word of God, who worship the God of justice? How is it that we can't settle these things among ourselves, that we have to go to somebody else to try to settle this dispute? I think it's interesting how he says it that way. Dare any of you. You know, sometimes we need to think about our ramifications, how it looks to people outside of the faith. Stop and think for a moment. If somebody who's an unbeliever sees us mistreating each other, how does that look? You tell me, in our day and time, if there is going to be an unbeliever who says some excuse why they're not going to be a believer, or why they're not going to attend a church, why they don't think they need to worship the way we do, what's the one excuse that they're going to give above any other? They're going to say, I don't want to go there because that's just full of a bunch of hypocrites. Why do I need to go there? That's the one excuse they're going to give. And I'll tell you, there's one way that we could give that to them, is if they see us doing exactly what he's saying they were doing. If they see that we can't even settle problems among ourselves, and that we're going to a court, how do you think that the judge of that court is going to view us? Imagine a judge who is not a Christian hearing this lawsuit between two brethren of the same congregation. They're coming to him. They're suing each other, it would be one way of putting it. And they want him to settle this problem. How does that even look to him? What do these so-called Christians look like if they can't handle this among themselves? Do they look very loving to you? Do they look like that they're reasonable to you, that they're able to go and settle this among themselves? You see, that's a big problem. Jesus said that the world will know that you are my disciples for the love you have to one another. And later in chapter 13, he's going to deal with that problem. I believe that's their problem here, it's a love problem. If you love one another, you're going to work things out. There should be a sweet reasonableness among ourselves. There should be a humility among ourselves. May it never be that we are human, okay? There are times where we may rub each other the wrong way. We may make a mistake and potentially one person feels slighted with what another person said or did. If that happens, and it can happen, we're a family. Families have disputes sometimes. But there needs to be a way in which we are trying to settle that. Is it that I'm looking for something to find fault? Is it that once you mistreat me, okay, now I'm going to make you pay? Is that my attitude? Or is my attitude, well, let's talk to the brother. Let's talk to the sister, whoever the problem is, and let's work that out. Shouldn't there be, if anybody, where there is a communication, shouldn't we of all people be able to do that? But going to those who are outside of the faith to try to execute justice when we are the people who are supposed to be just. I think that's interesting how he refers to them that. In verse 1, going to law before the unjust. All right. That's one way that he puts it. Well, we're supposed to be righteous. And how do we become righteous? It's God that makes us just. He's the just and the justifier. Well, when did we become just? Not when we became perfect, but we became just when the Lord justified us by His blood. Okay, and when we repented and we applied the blood, believing in His saving sacrifice, we've ceased our old ways and activities, and now we're trying to live according to His will. That's how we become just. Okay, that's how we become righteous. It's interesting that even Jesus himself in one of the parables referred to the persistent widow who went to an unjust judge. He even referred to this judge of a court as an unjust judge. Think about this for a moment. You think that a judge is supposed to know justice, but upon what basis? How does a judge of a secular court have a proper understanding of true justice if he's not even a believer of God? You and I both know that there are people, the theory behind some courts might be good, that wickedness needs to be punished, innocence needs to be preserved. If somebody's been wronged by another, then justice needs to be served. We recognize the principle, but we also know it doesn't always work out that way. especially in a man-made court. There are people who are bought off, who are bribed. There are loopholes in that system sometimes. In God's justice system, God is always just, God is always right, and He'll sort all that out, even if we get it wrong. But we of all people should understand true justice. Micah 6 in verse 8. What does the Lord require of you? But to love, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. We of all people, what does God want of us really? He wants us to understand Him. He wants us to follow Him. Well, that's what it's all about. We of all people should understand that. But to go to a judge of the world? Now, he brings another point in verse 2. And I admit that these are hard things to wrap our head around. And I don't want to pretend that I understand everything about what he's saying here. So I'm just going to take what he says at face value and admit I don't understand fully what's going on here. I'd rather do that than pretend I know. So when he says, "Do you not know that the saints shall judge the world?" I don't know that I fully understand that, but he says we will. So I just have to take that at face value. But then he says, "And if the world shall be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters?" Then in verse 3 he says, "Know you not that we shall judge angels?" There's another one that I don't know that I fully understand. But he says we will. So again, I take it at face value. We're going to judge angels. Well, if in some way, some fashion, whether that means that we're going to join the Lord in judgment of the world somehow. I know in Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, the Lord told to the apostles, He said that you're going to sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Is that related? Possibly. Somehow here there's a judgment that saints are going to have upon the world. And somehow here there's going to be a judgment that saints are going to have even on angels. Higher matters. But he's saying if you can judge these higher matters, more important things, surely you can handle the trivial. Surely you can handle the smaller matters. And isn't that interesting how he words that in verse 2? Are you unworthy to judge the smallest matter? What's the smallest matters he's talking about? Well, another phrase he uses in verse 3, things that pertain to this life. Little things. You hurt my property. That would be a small matter. Because you know why? That's a temporary, physical, earthly matter. You damaged something of mine. You mistreated me. That's a trivial matter in the overall scheme of things. Judging the world, judging angels, that might be a more important matter. These matters, isn't it interesting how he's putting things in proper perspective? I think this is important for us to see here, that if we're going to have bigger fish to fry, surely we can handle these smaller things. But that's what it's like. If I'm going to take you as my brother to court, that's pretty silly. I think he wants them to see if before I'm willing to go to that degree and make you pay, do I need to decide how important is this really to me? Is this a battle I want to die on? Is this a hill that I want to die on? Is it really that important? I mean, think about it. I'm just trying to think of an example. Imagine I set out paper plates, and you just take one, and you wad it up and throw it in the trash. Is that wasteful? Yeah. But what's a paper plate worth? A few cents. Okay? How angry and how much am I going to press that point? How important is that to me at that moment? Or am I just going to say, you know what? Let's let that one slide. In the overall scheme of things, there are some things we make a huge deal over because you wronged me, And now I'm going to demand my rights to the point where now I'm making a big deal about something that really is not as big of a deal in the overall scheme of things. I think that's why he is stressing the difference between things more important and smaller matters. It's a trivial thing. And one person put it this way, if you think you're going to sit on a Supreme Court, but you can't even handle matters in traffic court. You can't handle matters in a lower court. You see the problem of what these Corinthians are having, that they're going to a earthly man-made law to try to settle a dispute. Here's what I think. If you wronged me, I think I ought to be able to go to you alone, as the passage that was read earlier. And I should be able to talk to you and say, I think you've mistreated me here. Okay? And go to you, and that's what that passage teaches. Now my purpose there is not to shame you, not to expose you before everybody, not to take you to a court of law, but to go to you and restore you in your relationship with me and God. That should be my aim. Not just to make you pay. That should be my motive and my purpose. And if you repent, then problem is solved. There's nothing else needs to be done and go any further. But if I go and expose you and tell everybody else and I'm gossiping about you, I'm not seeking love at that point. Or if I take you into a man-made court, I'm skipping over the reasonableness that you and I need to be having with each other. You know, a brother to brother. Think about who we are. We're part of each other. We're part of the same family. One time whenever I was in elementary school, I can remember this one little dispute my brother and I had with each other. We were fighting on the bus or something like that, acting childish. So I took him to the principal's office. And I think about that now. Oh, that was the immaturity of us in elementary school. You know, that's pretty silly. Two brothers in the same family, one taking the other to a principal's office. Isn't that silly? Well, wouldn't you think that two brothers in a family ought to be able to settle that among themselves? There's no need in handling that, or in the principal's office. And that's kind of what he's saying here. We should be able to settle this among ourselves. And then notice what he does here with the Corinthians. The Corinthians who thought that they had knowledge, who thought that they were wise. There's several occasions here, repeatedly, he says, do you not know? In verse 2, do you not know? In verse 3, know you not. Verse 9, know you not. Verse 15, know you not. Verse 16, know you not. Verse 19, know you not. Why is he doing this? Why is he repeating this to the Corinthian brethren? Isn't he, in a way, humbling them, these people who thought they knew more than they did, to help them acknowledge that maybe I don't know as much as I think I do? And then when he says, is there not a wise man among you? Not one? These were people who thought they were wise. And yet he said, don't you even have one wise person that can judge between you two? I really think he's shaming them here to humble them and help them realize how little they actually were understanding and knowing. Sometimes we might need to be in our proper place there. When in verse 7, now therefore there's utterly a fault among you, because you go to law one with another. Why do you not rather take wrong? Now, so there's two options really that Paul is giving the Corinthian brethren. One is, settle it among yourselves, even the least among you. Or, what you should have to do is a third party, that like Matthew 18 called for. If you go to your brother alone and your brother doesn't hear you, then you take one or two more. That was the admonition from Matthew 18. Well, Paul's saying, don't you have one that would do that? So the first option is take one or two more. A third party to hear the dispute. Somebody that doesn't have the dog in the fight. Somebody that's going to hear both sides fairly and then make a judgment. This one's right. Or this one's right. Or you both have a valid point, but here's where you should settle here somewhere in the middle. Whatever that is, have somebody who can hear that and give a reasonable judgment. That would be better. That's option one. But now he's given even another option. And this is one that a lot of times people don't consider. And that is, overlook it. He says, why do you not rather suffer the wrong? Take the wrong. Why do you not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? You know, the Proverbs teaches that it's a glory of a man to overlook a transgression. Do you have to make this a fight? Or is this a matter where you can say, you know what? I'm going to think the best in my brother of what he just said about me. I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen and I'm going to overlook it. Might there be times where I assume the best in you, that maybe you didn't mean it that way, so therefore I'm going to overlook it. Or if something happens where you truly did do me wrong, maybe there's sometimes where I'm going to let that one go. That's a novel idea, isn't it? Now, we got to understand, in our American culture, there's an attitude that we've got to guard ourselves against. Our American culture sometimes has this notion that you're a weakling if you let somebody damage your property or hurt you in some way and then you do nothing. They think, I got to make them pay. I can't let you walk all over me. I can't let you turn me into a doormat. I can't let you have the upper hand over me, because now all of a sudden, now I'm a weakling. I've got to show you that you can't do that to me. And so I'm going to show you what my rights are. However, the Lord here is giving us a principle that sometimes might be wiser. And this is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It may be a sign of wisdom and maturity. And that is, you did wrong me, but I'm going to forgive you. You hurt me, but I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to hold a grudge. I'm not going to loom this over your head for the rest of your life. I'm not going to make you pay. I'm going to let this one go. Pardon. Forgiveness. Isn't that an amazing concept? When Jesus was on the cross and he had that mentality and that willingness, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Aren't you glad the Lord does not hold every single thing that we have done against us forever? Aren't you glad that the Lord loves mercy? You and I need to love mercy. And so mercy allows me to overlook transgressions. And that, again, that's not a sign of weakness. We really ought to understand that principle. So, as a conclusion of that, brethren going to law against a brother, we shouldn't be harming one another. We shouldn't be damaging each other, because we're part of the same unit. We're part of the same family. If I hurt you, I'm hurting myself, and I'm hurting Christ, because we're all connected. So I should not be defrauding you, taking advantage of you or any way. However, if you wrong me, sometimes the higher road is simply overlooking it. So consider this. what I do want to say in conclusion of this is we are human. We might upset one another. We might harm one another accidentally, or let's say it was in a wrong frame of mind. We do something we shouldn't do. Can we work that out? Is it like one mistake and you're done, cooked and you're done? It's not. And in conclusion, I want you to see that if you've wronged the Lord, the Lord is very slow to anger. He is long-suffering. He is patient. He's willing to forgive. And He's extending that to you even now. If you're here and you haven't obeyed the Lord, He wants you to come into a family. And He wants you to... You remember how the father of the prodigal son, when he came home, do you know the father of that prodigal son didn't say, "Where's my money?" The father of that prodigal son didn't say, "Pay up. If you want to live here." He didn't even say, "Here's the loan." The son came back. The son repented. The father forgave. And that father represents the Father in heaven in that parable. And that's what He's offering you. If you believe with all your heart that Jesus is the Christ, He's ready to forgive and remove the sin as far as the east is from the west. If you will confess, "I believe that Jesus is the Son of God." If you'll be baptized for the remission of your sins, He'll forgive you. But if you've done that, but you've wronged a brother, or you've done anything before God that you need to repent of, forgiveness is available. And like we talked about in class, you could use this time to confess your fault one to another, that you could be healed. And I don't believe that we're here to hold that against you. If I understand us, and I know us at all, I really believe this is true. That if one were to come forward and express some confession of sin, I really believe we'd just pray with you. We'd put our arms around you, and we'd accept you as a forgiven brother. But we're here to help you with that if your need is. Won't you do that while we stand and as we sing?